Welcome to episode 262 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat with good friend Shane Harmon as we look back on the biggest trends and stories from 2019.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, who won't dance before midnight, but after then, look out, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and you can find me, obviously, on this podcast, Sports Geek. It is available on all good podcasting platforms and available at sportsgeekhq.com, and apparently now available in your Alexa. You can just say, play, Alexa, play Sports Geek podcast, and apparently have this podcast playing in your kitchen. Again, I'm not sure. People are going to be listening to podcasts on smart speakers, but good on you, Alexa. As always, you can contact me via numerous methods, all digital. And if you want to send me a fax or send me a snail mail, you're welcome to do so. But email Sean at sportsgeekhq.com or send me a tweet at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek on most channels, including Twitter. And yes, I did have a family wedding on the weekend, and the Callanans know how to throw a party. And that does lead to dancing after midnight, and it's really good to see that I've passed on my dancing genes to my kids. So a really fun night out. Congratulations to Steve and Eve. Before I jump into this this chat with good friend Shane Harmon about the year that was, just to wrap up the year, thank you to everyone who supported the Patreon campaign. You can support the Patreon campaign for content like this, like the Q&A episodes, like the Sports Geek News newsletter. You can do so by going to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. It helps pay for the people that help put this together. Thank you very much to James, my podcast editor, DJ Joel, who does the voiceovers, Joel Lee, that's helped with the podcast show notes and booking of guests. So, yeah, if you can support that for as little as $4 a month, you can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. If you are a sports technology brand, or a sports marketing brand that want to reach sports executives, we've got listeners in the US of A across all major sports. We've got listeners in the European market, my friends over in England and the Premier League and in the football and different sports and basketball and the like in Europe. And then obviously we've got a lot of listeners here in the Asia Pacific region across Australia and New Zealand with my guest Shane Harmon from New Zealand. So if you want to reach those kind of listeners, as I've always said, the Sports Geek podcast listeners are people like yourselves working in the world of sport, trying to make a difference, trying to get cheeks in the seats, trying to engage fans. If you're a brand that wants to do that, please reach out and potentially become a silver or gold supporter of the Sports Geek podcast and what we're doing in the sports business space. Your logos will appear in all show notes and all emails that we send out. But let's get into it. 2019's been a really interesting year. So this is my chat with Shane Harmon. He's currently the CEO of Westpac Stadium. But by the time you listen to this, he'll be the CEO of Sky Stadium. He's been on the podcast before. I was really thankful for him to give up some time before he headed off for holidays. So this is my chat with Shane Harmon, CEO of newly named Sky Stadium. Very happy to have good friend of mine all the way from Wellington, CEO of soon-to-be-named Sky Stadium, Shane Harmon. Welcome back to the podcast.
G'day, Sean.
Well, this is going to be a little bit of a different podcast. Ideally, we would be doing this in a pub with a beer in hand and sort of looking back at the year that was, 2019. But with that not available, we have internet and Skype and a podcast, so we can do it that way. So I sort of wanted to look back at the year that was, and I guess I'll start with your year. What's been the big part of your 2019?
Yeah, we've had a big year in Wellington, Sean. Kind of started the year with our biggest ever event, M&M. We had 47,000 people in our venue. The biggest event we'd ever held previously was 42,000, and we now know the new capacity. And operationally, it couldn't have gone better. And very proud of the team here in terms of the job that they did. But it's when you work in the venue space, you know, people ask what's what's a KPI? Like, what does success look like? And you can look at queues or turnover and revenue, but when you're dealing with an event of that scale, your single biggest KPI is getting people in safely and home safely. Everything else is secondary after that. So it was a fantastic night, and we really nailed it that evening. And then we ended the year just saying goodbye to our naming rights partner of 20 years, Westpac. One of the longest naming rights deals in this part of the world. I think really only Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane has been there longer. There have been venues in Australia that have gone through 4 partners over that period of time. But we move on to a new partner in Sky, and Sky are the cable broadcaster here in New Zealand. They have the majority of the sports rights in New Zealand, a big media player in this market, and they will be our new naming rights from the 1st of January.
So when most people are listening to this, they'll be referring to the stadium as Sky Stadium. What does, part of the trends and the backwards and forwards of 2019 has been that sponsorship and valuation and those kind of things. What was the process like for you guys to be in market and be pitching to Sky? What was Sky looking for? What did you have to present to Sky? How much did you learn in that process?
Sure. I mean, we spoke to a lot of companies over the last 12 months in various categories, and I suppose the first discussion with Sky was based on 2 premises. One, they are in our venue every month of the year, filming content and distributing content, and we're the only venue in New Zealand that has got 12 months of Sky content in the venue. And then taking that a step further, I suppose the old adage over the last 10, 20 years that the at-home experience and the stadium experience, they're almost mutually exclusive. You either make a binary choice. You either sit at home to watch an event on TV, or you sit in the venue. So we looked at this as an opportunity of, well, how can a broadcaster and a stadium actually work together to improve both the at-home experience and the experience for subscribers, as well as that for fans in the venue. And, I'm not going to put out too much at the moment, Sean, but that's what we're working on at the moment. And it's going to be very, very fan-focused. And I think sponsorship has changed significantly over the last 10 years, particularly in the naming rights category. The old deals where it was essentially a name on a building and a logo on a building, that no longer flies. Brand awareness as an objective no longer really works. And it's not about us. It's really about how the partner can connect better with the fans and the audience and secure its business objectives. So this sponsorship is going to be very, very fan focused. We're going to be looking at a number of initiatives that are going to be about improving the fan experience at the stadium, but also delivering benefits for Sky customers at home.
I mean, that's the thing. It's always the balance, and it's interesting Sky being a broadcaster is, yes, they want everyone to be watching at home, but they also need the crowd. They are a significant part of the broadcast. Having that noise and the atmosphere driven from the crowd comes through the TV. And and that's why it is counter, like you said before, it's sort of counter to the goals, but it actually is. They do need a good, loud, engaged crowd because that makes for the spectacle. It makes for the drama. That's what we love about sport. Talking to Peter Sorkoff, that's what makes stadiums, cathedrals, and it's makes sport
it resonates so much better on the TV when you've got a full crowd, an engaged crowd, and a noisy crowd. It also makes for a much better TV product. Yeah.
So so that would have been. So I look forward to the off the record conversation to get more of the details, and look forward to seeing what you will be doing in 2020 in that space. I mean, I don't think I can look at 2019 and the sponsorship space, especially in the naming rights space, without looking at part of the exercise and I guess work that I did preparing for this episode was to go through all the Sports Geek news articles and which and what got the most clicks, because the articles are what got the most clicks on social end up in the email. So the very top of the iceberg of articles, one of the ones that got the most clicks and the most conversation was the story of Jeff David and the Sacramento Kings, and the absolutely astonishing, fraudulent behaviour to take $13 million off a couple of naming rights partners as part of the deals. Did you dive into that article at all?
I did. I mean, that whole ESPN article was just fascinating. I mean, there's almost a movie in that, Sean, I think, in terms of how he was able to do that over a period of time, and also how it was not tracked, and astonishing. And I work in a venue space, and we've got boards, subcommittees for finance, and we have fraud policies and fraud detection policies and whistleblower policies, etc. And no business, I think, is completely immune from potential fraud, but just the sheer level of fraud in that story was phenomenal.
Yes. So for the people who don't know, it was Jeff David was the chief revenue officer. So again, it wasn't someone at a lower tier. Effectively, when you do a naming rights deal, there may be some escalators around CPI and things like that, where it gets adjusted, and the naming rights partner might have to pay some more. And effectively, this Bolden take was, he negotiated with the two parties to say, we'll waive it, but just pay an upfront payment so these escalators don't kick in. And he just effectively sent an invoice with another company name. And in two transactions, a $9 million and a $4 million transaction, walked away with $13 million. Now, I say walked away until the point that someone in HR was looking at some files after he left Sacramento. I think it was to go to Miami. And they found these secret files and these extra companies, and did some cross-checking and realised what had happened. I agree. It does deserve a maybe 30 for 30 treatment or something along those lines. But if you're a sponsorship executive or a broker, this is not a way to make money in sports, but it is a fascinating read, because again, you and I both know all of the hoops and jargon and legal hoops would have had to go through to make any deal happen, let alone amounts of money of that magnitude.
And I can imagine the mad scramble in the US with 100 different professional teams and owners and presidents scrambling to look at their own organizations and what processes they have in place, so that could not happen again. Yeah,
well, you would hope so, but a fascinating read, and really good investigative journalism by the guys at ESPN to sort of pull that article out in November. But it is something. I think the other thing in the sponsorship analytics space, we sort of move away from the naming rights, is that it's still, especially in the digital space I'm playing in, it's still very much a developing space. There still is trying to understand what they should be valuing their assets at, what rate cards could be looked at. Like, the fact that I'm still running out with the digital divorce counsellor joke to sort of work between sponsorship and digital. It gets a laugh every time. But, it's one of those classic jokes where there's a little bit of truth to it, which is why it gets the laugh. I think the tools around the sponsorship and analytics piece are getting better, which are helping sell that story, but it's still largely underdeveloped across the industry for mine.
It is, I think, and it is improving. At the SEEK conference this year, certainly BI and digital, big focus on it, and measuring of sponsorship as well. And, there's still too much media equivalency used for sponsorship, where they're comparing the naming rights deal with the equivalent media valuation that would be worth. And now we're seeing, I think, a shift in this space towards tracking audience engagement. And for professionals within this industry, like when we're selling sponsorships, we're talking about our membership base, our TV ratings, our demographics, but we need to know much more deeper information now about our customers when we are talking to potential sponsors, and maybe their consumption rates. And I saw a sports team who renewed a sponsorship a couple of years ago, but it was with an automobile company. But they'd done a fantastic presentation on really deeply understanding their customer base, what type of cars they were buying, how often they were changing their cars, where they were having their car serviced. So they were able to go to the sponsor with a really deep understanding of their customer base and how it could really move the needle for that sponsor. So, it is advancing, and, brands are really looking at honing their objectives when it comes to
I
sponsorship, and looking at real return on those objectives.
So I think the other thing is like that on that media equivalency bit, or just really selling ads, in your feed effectively, is how hard the ad market is. Like we're seeing in the Australian market, we've seen a whole bunch of media companies band together to run an advertising campaign to tell brands to advertise, and they're fighting against the social and the social media networks, Facebook and Google, to try to claw some of that money back into TV and radio and print. And so if you're only in that space, then you're competing in that market that's doing it tough right now.
And that has a direct implication on rights values as well, Sean. I read today on Bloomberg that global TV advertising sales are down 4% in 2019. And traditional TV has hemorrhaged viewers in recent years, as you're probably aware, as they move from traditional TV to online services. So it is going through some seismic change, and advertising, particularly for free-to-air networks, has largely funded the broadcast rights. So we're seeing some substantial change, I think, in the media landscape, and we can talk probably in a lot of detail about OTT, because it's been a big year in this space, and I think probably a tipping point.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, the streaming OTT space of more leagues pushing out either their own product or players that are streaming only players starting to play in the space. Do you think is there a danger that too many sports see it as a bit of a silver bullet?
Well, I think that's the $64 million question. Is the revenue going to be there if and when we move largely to an OTT platform? And you're seeing already some of the traditional broadcasters are now switching more to an OTT focus. So This doesn't necessarily mean that the traditional broadcasters are going to disappear. It's just that their delivery platform is changing. But, you had, and probably the sporting administrator that I admire most in NBA's Adam Silver, even last week, said that the cable model was broken to a certain extent. And even the NBA's ratings are down, I think it was 23% on TNT and 19% on ESPN.
Yep.
And they're really struggling to engage with younger viewers who are a major chunk of the NBA's audience. And they're abandoning the traditional broadcasters in favor of over-the-top platforms. And, that's a lucrative deal. That was signed back in 2014, $24 billion US over 9 years. But their networks and viewership is down significantly over the last 4 years. So it is a tipping point for sports in terms of how we deliver content. You're starting to see some companies, like say for example Disney, who are now bypassing TV companies completely and launching their own streaming services. And of course they own ESPN. You're seeing telcos are now entering the market at pace as well. So it's a really interesting time, and I think this year we've seen some significant shifts in acceptance of OTT for sport. We saw Rugby World Cup broadcast in New Zealand on a telco platform, purely OTT, and it had issues like Optus did in Australia with the FIFA World Cup.
Yep.
And they're the challenges. It's going to be stable platforms. I think latency is a challenge, and I think that'll get better over time. And that the lag time between watching OTT compared to what's coming through on your Twitter feed, and sometimes Twitter being well ahead of what you're viewing on TV. Fragmentation is a huge issue as well. I mean, how many platforms are we going to pay for? And people can complain about the bundle of cable TV, but you're sitting home on a Saturday night and you're flicking through 10 channels of sport that are all in one place. I think there's going to be a limit to how many platforms and OTT products that fans are actually going to pay for, and they're going to start making choices between various sports. And then I suppose the final piece is, what does this mean for sponsorships, and how does the sponsorship piece change? Like, a lot of sponsors are paying for eyeballs that only TV can really deliver at that scale. And what will fragmentation, what will OTT do to those eyeballs? So it's really going to be a fascinating time, I think, over the next few years.
But I think this year, as much as any, like to have Peter Hutton from Facebook effectively stop being used as leverage, like, because everyone was either saying, "Oh, we're going to sell some of our rights to Facebook and some of the digital platforms." They've effectively stepped out of that conversation, and so
he made that very clear. He said that they were taking a very cautious approach, and that sports rights investment for Facebook was a big learning curve. So, it's not that they're not going to be moving quickly in that space. Yeah. All that said, you see Amazon now have launched the Premier League, and it's the Premier League's first foray into OTT within the UK. By all means, by all reports, it appears to have gone pretty well in terms of the delivery in the first week. But Amazon are claiming that millions watched its coverage on Tuesday and Wednesday night last week. And as I said, by all reports, that is coming across well. But even with the Premier League in the UK, you've now got, I think, 3 or 4 different broadcasters broadcasting that competition. So it is challenging for fans.
It is challenging for fans, and that's the thing. Like you said, the fragmentation, like what TV could deliver was, hey, here's our big audience. It makes it easy for the sponsor to understand who's watching. But now, if a league is across multiple products, multiple platforms, it does become harder to give a cohesive picture back to your partners.
Absolutely.
And then, I mean, like, the other part of when you're talking about platforms has been the rise and at least the fall and the stumble of the player media platform that sort of rose 4 or 5 years ago. And it's sort of had its concerns. We've had a couple fall over in this part of the world. We've seen Players Tribune have its challenges. Where do you think these platforms will be in 2020?
I think it has been a challenging year in this space. You mentioned the Players Tribune that has been sold. My understanding is that hemorrhaged money over the first few years, and it was the first one off the block, I think. We saw the collapse of 24, a platform in Australia as well, offering athlete content. And I was reading that article that you had on your links earlier on, but when you see a platform that's, in inverted commas, designed to rival Instagram and Twitter, that's going to be challenging. And I'm not sure. I mean, I love the Players Tribune. The content is fantastic. And I think one of the most positive contributions it's actually made has been destigmatizing mental health issues amongst athletes, and where they're really telling their own story from the heart. But in terms of the wider athlete platform, I'm not sure what problem it's actually trying to solve, because those athletes that are really good at it are already doing a great job on social media, particularly Twitter and Instagram. And I think making these platforms profitable is going to be very challenging, because are people going to pay for that content? I'm not so sure.
But isn't it a little bit of they went with an older model? They went with the advertiser ad-supported model at the wrong time. Like when the ad money is going down, it's tough to get some opportunities in that space. Whereas, if you look at some of the digital players that have risen and are rising in 2019, that are subscription based and subscriber focused. And high quality. So looking at things like The Athletic at the top end of recruiting all of the great talent in the journalism and podcasting space, or if you look at another model of the guys at Barstool that are focused on subscribers and pay-per-views and that kind of thing. Do you think it's a matter of they just got the model wrong for the time?
Look, I think so. That's my view. You mentioned The Athletic, and although that's not an athlete platform.
As a digital media, as a digital media business model, that makes far more sense. It's always going to be a concern with an athlete platform to how do you get enough content in there to make people pay. But the fact that they went with that advertiser-led model and branded content model in a space where there's so much of that.
I think with The Athletic, it really does offer a model that. Can show that readers will pay for targeted content. And I think one of the issues with the Players Tribune as well is that there just simply wasn't enough content coming out that would make it a viable subscription channel. My understanding is that The Athletic is close to profitability. I subscribe to it. I find it fantastic. I read it every day on my mobile or online. And they've done a good job, but really good talent, journalist names within each of the sports that are well known to fans, and great content and a lot of content.
That's the thing. You've got to have the volume of content and to satisfy the audience. That's the key. That's the key piece, which makes them very heavy with content producers and journalists.
Absolutely.
Moving away from the digital media piece, something that you're in the space and in that venue technology and that fan engagement technology. One of my most popular videos that I posted this year was the AR fan posed with the pros booth at Cowboy Stadium, where people can walk up to a sign and effectively take a photo with the players that would walk around them. You're obviously closer to the scene, being in the venue space. Is there something developing in that space that's?
Look, I think so. I think that example, and everybody should have a look at that if they haven't seen it. I'd be surprised if anybody in the industry hasn't seen it, because it pretty much went viral when it was published. But that's a really clever use of AR, delivering a personalized experience. It's an offering I think that sponsors will be all over, and a great ability to be able to collect data as well. But in the venue space, some of the most innovative technologies I'm seeing, and I think there's been a shift away from mobile focused technology to more almost back of house technology that's focused on improving the whole guest experience. Because I think when we started looking at venue tech initially, it was kind of focused on the mobile phone almost being your remote control within the venue. And I'm going to be a bit of a contrarian here, but we talk about trying to recreate the at-home experience of the venue. Well, what actually does that even mean? And why would we even want to do that? I mean, at the end of the day, the live experience has to be at the heart of attracting a fan to an event. That is the difference from sitting at home and watching TV. And I agree somewhat with Mark Cuban's now infamous rant about mobile phones. I think it goes back to 2011 where he wrote that blog about we don't need no stinking smartphones in venues.
Yep, I agree. I agree with that as well. Yeah,
I mean, his premise was that we want the whole event to be very participatory. We want it to be social. We want it to be inclusive. We want it to be memorable. So it focused very much on creating on social experiences, and I agree with that. That's where we need to be, and where we were focused years ago on mobile phone and you could watch the game on your mobile phone while at the venue. I mean, why would you even do that? Or in-seat delivery. A lot of people were offering that, early on in the piece. That's kind of moved away. But the innovative technologies that I'm seeing are looking at venue operations. So, for example, facial recognition for security.
Yep.
I think fingerprinting, biometrics, replacing ticketing at some stage is a really interesting area. Queue management.
So it's stuff where, because I think the early stuff, it was where tech was forced into the stadium to say, hey, this is tech. But what we're seeing now is the tech is integrated into the stadium and it just makes life easier. And that's always been the tech that's worked the best. But it was a bit of, like early on, we've got to get this tech in. And so it was the bells and whistles of in-seat ordering and those kind of things. But like you said, the clear ticketing, biometric, hey, get you in faster, makes life better.
Yeah, and we're looking at technology for areas such as sustainability and turf management as well. And these are going to be areas that aren't directly fan focused, but will have an impact on the overall experience. And I think going back to the Mark Cuban comment, I think somehow technology has become a euphemism for fan engagement, and even the term fan engagement annoys me somewhat because it's positioned as this new thing. When there've been innovators and teams and leagues doing fantastic stuff in engaging fans for decades, but for me, a venue is about the social experience, and the technology should sit in the background as an enabler, but it should not be the center of that experience when you're in the venue.
And you think, this is a question that Aaron Lavallee asked me, I did on a Q&A around balancing, like how do you get that balance between, Gen X or the younger generation and the boomers, so to speak, the current ticket buying public, which are make up that market. Do you think the younger market does want their tech, but they're looking for the experience piece first, and if the tech's integrated, it's a bit of I sort of expect that.
Yeah,
and it's sort of how you build out, whether it's new bars and those kind of things. They just expect to be able to, tap and go and have that on demand feel that they get everywhere else they go out.
Absolutely, and that should become automatic, as you said.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be forced from the beginning, which is, I think, where we started this journey.
Yeah. I just think, early on, we 10 years ago talking about, Wi-Fi, and we got to the point where Wi-Fi was, utility of stadiums. That's where I think this, this tech play from a stadium point of view, it's in that same space.
We have an opportunity with a broadcaster, because the great thing about having Sky on board now is the content that they have, because they own all the rights, and so we're thinking of areas. Well, how can we use mobile device to enhance the game day experience? So, TMO or VAR or video reviews is obviously a very hot topic at the moment.
Yep.
So we're looking at opportunities about, how can we push that through the mobile device immediately, so a fan can look at their phone immediately after something's happened and make their own decision? So it almost becomes a TMO or a VAR in your pocket. So I think there is room for video and mobile phone, but only in terms of enhancing the experience, and in not being the center of the experience itself.
Yeah, definitely. I guess if I'm looking at 2019, I have to review my own one. And I guess from my point of view, I've probably spent a lot more time on esports than I have in any other year. Now, being in the world of esports,
how has your year been, Sean?
It's been good. I like to discuss, say it's sort of like I've got my esports MBA this year. I've learned a lot about it with my League of Legends team, Gravitas. I think there's a lot of trends that we've discussed around sponsorship and analytics and those kind of things that are very much key issues in the esports space. I think, whatever sport is, as far as maturity of sponsorships and media rights and those kind of things, esports is 5 or 6 years behind in that space. And I think the first, not to dismiss the people who've been doing the esports thing for many years, because it's been around for 10 to 15 years, depending on who you talk to. They've been very much in evangelist mode to tell everyone about it. And now we're going through the process of decoupling some of that evangelism to the actual opportunities and the actual deliverables. So, the easiest thing for me to say is, 300 and something million people watched a League of Legends final, or this is how many people were watching Dota, or here's how many people were watching the Fortnite World Cup, and sort of trying to boil that down into actual comparable, figures to say, what is it? How is it similar to sports we know, content we know, metrics we know? Yeah. And I think that's been the biggest eye opener. There's a lot of appetite and a lot of interest from brands to understand the space because, like a lot of sports, it's got an attractive younger audience that's going to move into a prime time to spend. They're going to want credit cards. They want to buy cars. They want to buy insurance. All the key things that sponsors get into sports for. But it's just the data, which is quite strange because it's primarily a digital product. The data and the maturity of the sponsorship market's not quite there yet. And so that's presents the opportunity. And so I think there's some people like the guys at Stream Metrics are doing some good stuff where they're collating the Twitch audiences across ISPs to give a layer of actually knowing how and when people are actually watching a stream, and then overlaying that with some demographic data.
And I think that's really important for the industry because I think third-party verification is a very necessary next sport in esports development.
Yep.
Because I'm from the outside looking in, I think I've seen some maturity in the industry over the last 12 months. It started badly, I think, where there was a high-profile article saying that League of Legends was bigger than the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And some, frankly, BS metrics, I think, in terms of the viewership. So, but that's a sign of an industry that's been in big growth mode and is now maturing. Does esports need to do a better job in selling its story to sponsors, Sean?
Oh, completely. I think there's here's what our media opportunity is as far as where the games are broadcast. But I also think there's a really big piece around activating their events. One of the things that sports do really well is activate their home games and premium games and have sponsors involved where you've got fans, in real life. So I think there's a big opportunity there because, again, that's something that sponsors understand. If you said, hey, you're coming to an A-League game or an NBA game, and this is how many people will be there. This is what the activation will be. They understand those costs, those what that might look like, and it is very easy to connect and secure budgets and all of those kind of things. So, I think as great it is that we've got this new platform, Twitch. We've got the fight that's happening between Twitch and Mixer. For those of you who don't know, Microsoft is Mixer's streaming platform. There's effectively a bit of a streaming war battle happening in the gaming space. But what is the opportunity for a brand to meet and greet a potential gamer or an esports fan? It's probably at some of these events.
My understanding is that sponsorship, it's not for the faint-hearted brands either, because it has to be incredibly authentic, doesn't it? And the community will call it out pretty rapidly if it's not.
Yeah, so that is, I guess part of the culture. And again, I don't think it's a gaming audience. I think it's that 16 to 22-year-old audience. They can spot an ad a mile away, whereas a brand can slide a bit of content into Facebook, and a 35 to 55-year-old just thinks it's a bit of content that they're being shown. They don't quite understand it's an ad potentially, whereas this audience has grown up with these platforms. They know when an influencer is trying to sell them something. They know when a brand is trying to do that, and so if a brand just takes their standard TVC and just drops it into the market, they'll just go, well, you didn't really make an effort, did you? Whereas the ones that do look for authenticity and really do talk to the gamer esports market do have some success. So that's the danger for the marketer that doesn't understand the space. And that's where there's a lot of work to be done in educating them. So the guys at Zoop doing a good job, sort of helping brands understand what the value is of what they're doing in the esports space. That helps a lot. That sort of brings people along the journey.
Very good.
Because it's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit like 10 years ago when more of the media was moving into digital, and then more of the media was moving into social. That reticence of jumping in is exactly the same. So there'll be brands that want to dive in and tackle it, and they'll reap the rewards of getting some of those assets at a cheaper rate. But also they'll learn what they should and shouldn't do as they're getting started.
Okay.
So what other, I guess, big topics
for me,
or streams?
not technology related, but it'll be interesting to see how tech evolves and if there are going to be unique digital opportunities in this space. I really think 2019 has been a tipping point for women in sports.
Yep.
And I think particularly this part of the world, I think in Australia and New Zealand, we are leading the world somewhat in the area of equality. I mean, and just some examples off the top of my head. Cricket Australia vowed to top up the prize money for the International Cricket Council's T20 World Cup, so that the prize money matches the men. Both events take place in Australia next year.
Yep.
Here in New Zealand, the new master agreement for women's cricket will see the payment pool double over the next period. New TV deal for netball in New Zealand. Women's Big Bash cricket rating really well on TV, and then the Matildas, the Australian women's soccer team, earning the same pay as the men. Have we got a long way to go? Yes, we have. But I think 2019 has seen a fundamental shift in thinking and interest. And there's a big few years ahead in this part of the world. You've obviously got the Women's T20 World Cup in Australia in the early part of next year. In New Zealand in 2021, we've got the Women's One-Day International World Cup for cricket, and also the Women's Rugby World Cup. And then there's talk of Australia and or New Zealand bidding for the Women's FIFA World Cup for 2023 as well. So it's a big period ahead, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how sports and leagues sell this story, because ultimately success is going to be dictated by eyeballs and how many people we can get coming to watch women's sport and watch it on TV. But I think this year has been a really solid shift in thinking, and the signs are looking promising.
I also think it's also related to the fact that there are new channels and opportunities opening up that for this content to live on, like that did not exist 5 or 6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago there was only X many channels, and now that we're seeing more digital and streaming have success in a niche niche for our US listeners, space, it's far easier. And I think the other thing is how rights holders are tackling it, whether it is going down the path of managing and creating their own production, and so then the cost to the buyer isn't as much as it once was. So,
and I think the interesting part will be the development of these brands, the personalities, and then how we use the digital tools to be able to express that. And will it be different to how we position and sell male sport? It's just going to be a fascinating time ahead. See how this evolves. I
do think I'm just trying to hopefully I get the name right. Jen Van Dyke is at Wasserman. She set up an athlete digital network effectively to help athletes leverage themselves as brands. So it's not down the path of player media platforms, but effectively helping them better leverage themselves in partnerships and using digital to drive that. I think they'll have a balanced roster. With US women's football stars and those kind of things, I think as that appetite for that type of activations and reaching that audience, I think that will also flow into the women's game in its multiple forms of multiple sports.
Absolutely.
And then anything else from any other big issues or things?
Well, one of my big takeouts from SEAT this year, Sean, and obviously technology within the high performance athlete space has been evolving very fast over the last number of years, and I think the analytics that we apply to athletes, we're now starting to use those analytics within the business side of sports. But yep. I think one of the emerging trends is athlete well-being, and this is quite a niche topic, but sleep. And I think coincidentally, you did interview Steve Reese, from the Phoenix Sun and Phoenix Suns, and Steve is a CIO of the Phoenix Suns and is a mutual friend of your and mine. But they've done a lot of work in this space, and for the CIO to be working with the athletes to look at how sleep patterns are paramount to having a good night's sleep and managing athlete fatigue and what is the technology that can be used to improve that. It's a really fascinating area, and there was a topic that we actually opened the SEAT conference with, and clearly this is not just applicable to athletes, it's applicable to all of us who work in this industry, and particularly an industry where there are many late nights involved. But this is a new area which I think is going to be really interesting to follow.
Yeah, definitely. It is a good listen, and I have been trying to get a better night's sleep since that conversation with Steve. And I do think there is a lot of stuff happening in the high performance space and that player tracking, player wellness space. I mean, the other piece is that we did see, in that space, Google went and bought Fitbit. And so what's that gonna look like down the track when Google's got access to all of that data? I think, so one other trend for mine has been where we're starting to see more sports content go on non-traditional channels, and especially those wider form documentaries, whether it be some of the stuff that we're seeing on Netflix, and then a few of the other teams that are building out these documentaries, and then finding other places. I think we'll see more of that. I think more of that will get pitched. I think there'll be more platforms like Netflix buying that kind of content and not buying the traditional. I want the match vision and the highlights, but they really want to buy some of that inner sanctum documentaries type of thing. I think there'll be a bit more of a developed pipeline there, I think, for creating some of that creating some of that content. Have you watched any of those?
I have, absolutely, and that seems to be where Netflix are heading in the sports space. I mean, they don't appear to be particularly interested at this stage on securing rights themselves, but those behind the scenes stories are what fans really lap up, and is a really good space to be operating in.
Yeah, and so it's just going to be interesting to see what I guess if there is some deal flow there for teams to do it and what their objectives are. Are they just doing it to get a wider audience and appease their fans, or is it a content play in the same way we keep seeing all of the comedians doing a special for Netflix because they want to keep churning out content? Is there going to be a pipeline of fly on the wall type documentaries or different types of content that might be actually where Facebook Watch and Netflix and Hulu and the like start pitching for that content?
Well, I completely agree, and if you look at the shows that they've done with the Premier League teams and the Manchester City example, what's happened in the UK this year is that football rights have actually plateaued, and my understanding is that the current rights have declined slightly from the previous period. Now, the global rights have increased, so the overall pie has increased, but in the UK, it has plateaued, and I think we're going to see this across the world now, where we're probably at a plateau in terms of sports rights. We're not going to see the increases that we've seen in previous years. So, sport has enjoyed an almost uninterrupted bull market for content for the last 25 years. So what do we do when this primary cash source, doesn't rise at the rate it's been rising at, or starts to decline? So then we start looking at other content, and I think these docu-series is a prime example of where sports are starting to look at, well, where is the next content, where is the next revenue stream related to content, and I think that behind the scenes piece is going to become the next really invaluable push from sports to monetize content.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was Hollywood Reporter sort of said that sports rights make up 26% of global content spend.
Yeah.
And so, I think it is most likely plateauing or dipping down. I think the only other space where there is some growth is, especially in the global sports, is where they're tackling particular regions. So we're seeing, the NBA starting its push into India. The Chinese market has obviously got a lot of upside, but as our friends at the NBA found out a couple of months ago, one or two mistimed tweets can make everything look very difficult, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the Chinese market, because it's seen as an opportunity to drive revenue.
I think on that point, I mean, and it's one of the articles actually on your list of most-clicked articles, but it's an interview with an article by Phil Carling, who's the global head of football for Octagon, on SportCal, on a SportCal article entitled "Addressing the Football Rights Plateau."
Yep,
and he really drills into that area about building, I quote from him, complex portfolios of rights and assets across multiple geographies provides a far deeper and engaged relationship with consumers than was ever possible during a 30-second advert in UK's Coronation Street, for example.
Yep.
And you see some of these teams now opening offices within these major markets, and they get it. Like that's where the future growth is going to come from. But to do that, you have to be hyper local. And you see the big brands of the Liverpools and Man Uniteds of these world doing market specific sponsorship deals, you got to be on the ground, I think, and understand those markets to be able to pull that off. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, do you think? I mean, it's very early on. One of the big deals that was announced this year, and revolutionary in a way, was the All Blacks deal, where there was effectively some equity as part of the deal. Like, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think so, and I think certainly it's interesting from a broadcast perspective. But the more interesting piece for me was a sport, and a major sport, looking beyond its traditional revenue streams And you've seen this over the last few years as well, particularly in the US, where some of the sports and some of the bigger leagues are looking at, they're developing incubators for sports technology, where they're taking equity plays, and obviously, a big bet, and not a big financial bet, but a potentially big ceiling bet, a high ceiling bet on some of these coming to fruition and becoming global companies. And what they're doing here is that they're looking at creating future and diverse revenue streams and new revenue streams that move beyond traditional ticketing, broadcast, and sponsorship. So that's probably the more interesting play for me, is seeing New Zealand rugby taking an equity play. But there are other sports and teams and leagues that are doing this as well, and taking equity in businesses that traditionally sports would not be invested in.
Well, effectively, one of the most successful sports technology, spin-offs, ML BAM, is a prime example of that technology is Disney Plus. And when Disney came along and bought BAM, in its entirety for the technology and the platform, so that's a perfect example of a sport building out a non-core business that can bring in sizable revenue and money into a sport.
And ironically, they've been, and that delivered a substantial dividend when they sold to Disney, to each of the owners of the teams. But MLB have been streaming since the 90s. They were at the forefront of this. But, and kind of going back to Adam Silver's point about the TV deals, while we continue to chase the dollars associated with these TV deals, it is beginning to have an adverse effect on how we engage with our younger audiences. So there's going to be a tipping point, I think, where do you take the revenue, or do you potentially take a bit of a haircut, but open yourself up to distributing your content either directly by yourself or across multiple partners? Because you've often seen in the past, for example, that when a major broadcaster secures content, they want to secure all the content, like they want to secure the digital rights as well. And normally, those digital rights tend to be available only to the cable subscribers. So that model is starting to break up. But Silver made that point quite clear, that the deals have been lucrative, but they have come at a cost.
I mean, the only thing I think is that I wanted to make in the trends, and it's not so much in this part of the world and not in Europe, but the advent of sports betting and gambling in the US market. Do you think that's going to provide that gap in potential revenue as that beast starts working its way across America?
Okay, I think it will. I think there's tremendous growth opportunity for it in the US, but as you well know, Sean, I mean, the US culturally is very different to this part of the world. And, there's been, I think we're at a tipping point somewhat in this part of the world, particularly in Australia, in terms of how widespread gambling advertising is in all of the sports broadcasts, and it's reached a tipping point, I think, in terms of acceptability. And but in the US, it's a little bit like the secondary ticket market as well, as an example, where secondary ticket market is much more socially acceptable in the US, where we still continue to frown on it in this part of the world. So just different market, but I think gambling is the next frontier in the US in terms of sports rights, and it's not just the dollars involved. It's obviously the access to data, new customers, being able to communicate with those customers, and learning more about their customers. I think that's coming like a juggernaut.
Yeah, and I think it also opens up, and we're already seeing it, new revenue streams on the data and the metadata around your sport that sports betting companies are willing to pay for. I think that that opens up in that market in a big way.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, do you have any big plans, or what do you look forward to for 2020?
I'm looking forward now personally to working with a new partner who is going to work us hard. We're going to be doing a lot of work in terms of looking at customer data and segmenting customers in terms of where commonalities are, and starting to look at personalized experiences via our sponsorship deals. And we're going to need some good data tools to be able to do that work. So I think analytics and sponsorship for me is the exciting space for the industry over the next 12 months. And I know it's an area that a mutual friend of ours in Russell Skibity has talked a lot about over the years at Seed Conference. So I think that's going to be the next frontier, particularly in this part of the world. I think obviously the US have been ahead of us. Really interested to see kind of the next stage of where women's sport goes over the next 12 months. I think we've seen some seismic change this year, and then I'm particularly interested in kind of behind the scenes operational efficiencies that tech are going to bring to us at venues.
Yeah, I do think you touched on it briefly. The sustainability piece for venues is not just it's not just a ticking the box to stay green. There's some real major benefits that you can get out of it financially by correcting some of the issues that have just always been there.
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking, reducing landfill, phasing out single-use plastic. We're looking at solar power. We're looking at electric car charge stations, etc. So yeah, looking to reduce our footprint as much as possible. Now, the reality is that stadiums, they're not the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, but I think because we're at the center of community, we can play a major role in changing attitudes, and I think that's the role that we would like to play.
Very much so. Well, thank you very much for joining us for I think it's your last task before you head off on a family holiday. So appreciate catching up. And as we do, catching up multiple times in 2019. I look forward to doing it more in 2020.
Thanks, Sean.
New workshops on audience, content, distribution, valuation, and pitch following Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process. Go to digitaltodollars.com.
Thanks again to Shane Harmon. Very active on the Twitter is Shane Harmon, at Shane Harmon on Twitter. And you can see links to all of those articles that we mentioned in the show notes, sportsgeekhq.com/261, or check your email. If you're a subscriber to Sports Geek News, we actually listed all of those in the final wrap-up email that I sent last Wednesday. But yeah, you can check out those links. And if you haven't, if you did get that email, please forward it to a friend. Show them what they've missed out on in 2019. I'd love to have them on board. If you haven't signed up, you can do so at sportsgeekhq.com/SGN. For a wrap up, obviously, if you're interested in developing your digital presence and developing the commercial opportunities from your digital, you can do so using our Digital to Dollars process. Please reach out. Happy to discuss how we can help you better define the audiences you're tackling, review and expand on the content opportunities that you're taking on board. How do you leverage the different distribution channels you've got from a social media point of view, email and the like? How do you tackle new platforms like TikTok? And then work on your value proposition. What do you value those assets at? And how do you pitch them to sponsors? That's what Digital to Dollars does. We can lean into helping your digital team more and helping them understand the commercial aspects of it, or we can help your commercial team to better understand the digital assets they have and help them, give them the tools to sell. So please, if you're interested, go to digitaldollars.com or reach out. I'm not going to have an out-of-office email on. I'll always be available. I'm always available in some form or another in the digital space. So yeah, you can send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com, or check it out at digitaltodollars.com. Before I wrap up, I did want to get your feedback. I know this is very close to Christmas. Releasing this on Christmas Eve, so you're you're obviously listening to this after Christmas, I hope. If you're listening to this on Christmas Day, Merry Christmas from me. Happy holidays to everyone as a listener. The Q&A episodes, we've put them on pause for the break. Did 8 episodes, 3 questions episodes, 24 questions. Thank you very much for the people who sent the questions in. I want your feedback. Did you like the episodes? Do you want them back? What did you think? Were they useful? Did you like the short, sharp format? So these are all of my questions. I'll obviously see some people in real life over the break, and when I do talk to you, please let me know. I always try to test out new pieces of content and see if it works. I like the format. I need more questions, so keep sending the questions in, whether sending them in via email or DMs or LinkedIn messages. I will bank up those questions and push out more episodes of Q&A in 2020. But yeah, give me your feedback. So yes, as I said, taking a little bit of a break from the publishing schedule for both Sports Geek, the podcast, and Sports Geek News over the break. But for those of you who have been listening for the last couple of years, what we do over the Christmas, New Year break is bring back Sports Geek Replay. Sports Geek Replay is replaying some of the good episodes, some of the best, most downloaded, most interesting, most talked about episodes over the past 12 to 18 months. Because the thing is, when you do a year in review recap, some really great episodes that you might have just done a couple of weeks ago never get into a replay series. So yes, you can go back and listen to great episodes like the one with Steve Reese and Peter Sorkoff, and last week's one with David Barton Ginger, but it doesn't make any sense to put them in a replay series. They might be in next year's replay series. You never know if you download them enough. So starting Boxing Day, we'll have episodes coming out every single day. They have been curated by myself, one, because I thought they were interesting conversations. I think they're worth a re-listen, or they're worth a listen if you didn't in the first place. So we'll have guests like Damien DeBowen from Visit Victoria, Ben Klink from South Sydney Rabbitohs, Marina Go talking about her experience in netball, Shannon Gove talking about his rostering product Rosterify and how he's helping staff up major events around the world, Colin Kelly talking about LAFC's digital, Lawrence West about the world of sponsorship here in Australia and the advances at the NBL, Tim Hayden talking about sports startups and innovation in the world of sports, Mark Anderson from Collingwood talking about his time at Collingwood FC and what they look to do in the future, Cassandra Heilbronn talking about the world of sport and law, Josh Barney talking from Utah Jazz Gaming, talking about esports and the NBA, Kate Palmer looking from the Australian Sports Commission, or Sport Australia as it's now known, looking at the overall administration of sport in this part of the world, Rob Mills talking about the valuation of sponsorships and IP and what they're doing there at Turnstile. Amit Baines from the CEO of the Western Bulldogs, talked to him. Bit of a recap with Rob O'Gorman from the Fortnite Summer Smash and the Tennis Australia. And also Neda Tabatava-E for San Jose Sharks, which was one of my favourite discussions from the year. So there is our Sports Geek Replay lineup. So you'll be getting those into your podcast schedule. So I hope you appreciate it. I hope you give it a re-listen, or if it's an episode you may have missed. Again, you can always send me feedback, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. And if you're thinking about how you can support Sports Geek in some way, you can do so via Patreon. Check it out, sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon, Patreon. Last but not least, thank you very much. You've got this far. Congratulations. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. I do appreciate the messages of people saying they've just started listening, or the people who've said they've been listening since 2013. It's terribly humbling to find out someone is listening to my ramblings and my chatter with friends around the world. I really do appreciate it. I really am thankful of all the opportunities that the podcast delivers, both from new client work to learning about the new world of sports tech and how it's developing. So thank you very much for listening. As I said, thank you very much for reaching out. Thank you very much for reaching out to my guests. It really does mean a lot to me when I catch up with a guest and they say, I've had a lot of great feedback from the podcast. So if you do see someone over the break and you have listened to their podcast, please say thank you from me, but thank you from yourself, and tell them what you learnt, those kind of things. I'm really looking forward to a bigger and better 2020, both in the world of sports business and esports, as Gravitas moves into its second year in League of Legends. But yeah, onwards and upwards. Really excited about the space from an esports point of view, but also excited about some of the developments that I discussed today with Shane on the podcast in the sports, fan engagement, technology, marketing, digital space. Continues to grow. So I look forward to working with you. Look forward to talking to you next year. Until next year, till 2020, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join Sports Geek Nation access to exclusive Slack and Facebook groups with regular Q&A sessions with Sean Callanan. Go to sportsgeeknation.com to join. Need help with your digital rate card? Not sure how to price your assets? Is there a disconnect between digital and commercial? That is where Sean works best, in digital divorce counselor mode. Book a time for a call with Sean to discuss the Sports Geek process. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.
Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.